Welcome, Ridgeview Church. Thanks for joining us today online. My name is Jesse. I'm happy to be here today to share this time together. And by the way, it's Father's Day. For all you fathers out there, I hope you have a great day. We're going to continue our series today of Love Over Hate. But before we get there, please enjoy some worship music with us.
In the presence of my enemies, Sing a little louder. 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 Oh, sing a little louder. Sing a little louder.
So I want to start today by telling a story about an experience I had in church a few years ago. And it'll kind of help set the base for what we're going to talk about today. Several years ago, my wife and I, when we were newly married, my daughter was maybe 2 or 3 years old, and we were involved in a church, a local church, a very large one in our community. And my parents went there, and we weren't really super involved. We didn't go every Sunday, but my parents were there. And of course, it's cute when you have 2 and 3 year olds in the children's choir. And so my daughter had been participating all year long, and at the end of the year, they had this big worship day where the choir would come together on Sunday morning, and everybody would watch them and clap and look how cute they were and laugh at the little antics they were doing on stage. And so we get into the auditorium, and it's very large, and we're a little late, as a young family, and we see there's just a couple pews up front that are open. And so we kind of sneak through the crowd and get up to the front and sit down in one of the front pews. And it's the early service, and we're surrounded by some congregants you could tell probably have been there for a long time and been in that church for a long time. And so we're there, and my wife has a cup of Starbucks coffee. And we don't know anything different. We're just waiting for the service to start. And an usher came up and told us, he said, "Hey, I don't want to have to kick you guys out, but you can't have coffee in the sanctuary." I was taken back a little bit. I mean, in this current day and age, to me, having coffee in the sanctuary is just kind of normal now. I mean, I grew up in a church that was really very strict, and so I understand it, because we couldn't wear baseball caps or have coffee in the sanctuary either. But I was a little taken aback. And so we were asked to step outside to the lobby, and we go out there, and there's another usher that says, "Hey, there's signs at the front," and we missed the signs. We didn't see them. And she says, "We're worried about the carpet getting soiled. That's why we can't have drinks." And you see, I understood. I mean, there's rules that we have to follow, and I get it, but I was a little taken aback by the approach, because what happened was somebody complained to an usher, who then came and spoke to us, and we had to go to the lobby, and we were spoken to again. And these people around us couldn't have just told us what the rules were, and we would have followed them. But no, they went and complained. And what took me so aback by this is that they didn't know that if we had been going to that church for a day, or if we had been going there for 10 years or for 20 years, and they didn't know. And what they also didn't know is that my wife, we're newly married, and she'd never been to a Christian church before she met me. She'd never heard a Christian sermon. She had never been in a Christian community. She had never, ever been a part of any of that. She had never heard a Christian prayer. And she had no experience with religion, except for occasionally going to the Catholic Church in her local community as she was growing up. And so what we see is we have this story that is so fragile between my wife and in the community of the Christian church, and anything little like what happened could derail that. And those people had no idea about all of our backstory and all of our history and all of the drama and trauma that could have occurred in our lives and did occur because of that one person that, instead of coming up into us and introducing themselves and explaining that there are rules that we can't have coffee, went and complained to an usher who used the words that he didn't want to kick us out, but we couldn't have coffee, and that they're more concerned about the carpet than the people. And that's what I felt. And so we get a taste of why this type of incidences and stuff occurs within our lives and within the churches. In the verses we're going to be discussing today, it's Hebrews chapter 13, 11 through 16. And as I read them, I want you to keep in mind the book was written to remind the people Jesus is better than the institutionalized Mosaic law that was deeply ingrained and followed in society, in the society of the time, even after Jesus' death and resurrection. So I'm going to read those verses now. The high priest carries the blood of animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for which such sacrifices God is pleased. And so as we look at these verses, let's start by talking about the meaning of the phrase outside of the camp. But to get there, we need to understand what is inside the camp. What are these verses talking about inside the camp? And as they stayed inside the camp appears comfortable, right? I mean, the most holy place is inside the camp. The place where the sin sacrifice was made and based on rules and laws. And so we know that laws are found inside the camp. The laws of Moses and what we see in the Old Testament, the laws that the people followed to a point of what was outside the scopes of God's design for them. And to the point of ultimate rejection of Christ. That's what we see, right? And you see the laws and rules were meant to bring people to the point of salvation, to help us understand that we can't do it all by ourselves, that we can't follow the laws to a T. We're incapable of it. And that we need Christ's intervention in our lives. And see, the laws were not meant to be a permanent fix for salvation, but a temporary solution to a problem that Christ's act on the cross solved indefinitely. You see, Christ is the better sacrifice, being the one that could bring everlasting salvation, unlike the sacrifice of the animals presented in the laws and rules of the old covenant that God had with the people. And in these rules and laws, these sacrificial laws and rules that we see in the first part of the verses that we just read. And so the laws largely became about the betterment of man and not about God. And they brought comfort and security and were inside the camp. But what they did not bring was real comfort through salvation. And that was done outside of the camp. And we see that play out in the second set of verses. The verses state the dead animal carcasses are placed outside the camps. Not a good vision, is it? Good picture. Jesus suffered outside the camp. He walked that lone Calvary road up to the hill where he was crucified outside the camp. He hung on the cross outside the camp, away from the comfort of the rules and laws and security. And so why did Jesus do this? We get a taste of it in verse 12. It says, to make the people holy through his own blood, to make us different through holiness. That's what's occurring. But the verses go a step further in explaining what is outside the camp. You see, need is outside the camp. Verse 13 states, then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. When we bear his disgrace, we face the difficulty and suffering he faced. The need. And so outside the camp is living outside of the institutionalized rules and laws, outside the comfort they bring. And we as Christ followers are called to be radical in living outside of the camp where we will suffer and thus be in need. But why do we do it? Verse 14 tells us, for here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. We as Christ followers are not living for the here and now, but what is to come, a city where we dwell with our God forever. That's what we're looking towards. And so we may be uncomfortable now and in need now by living outside of the city. However, it is easier when we remember that the city and society we are cast out of, that Jesus, like Christ, was cast out of, is only temporary. And so what does this type of living bring? Like what comes out of this, right? Verse 15 and 16 tells us, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifice God is pleased. So when we live outside the camp, we live by the new covenant with Christ. A covenant where he is a sacrifice, and we no longer need to bring sacrifices to God, unlike the old covenant laws. And so the altar is the cross, and Jesus is the priesthood. He's the high priest. And the sacrifice becomes praise and love. Good. That's what comes out of this. That's what comes out of this life. And so you see the traditions and the rules and laws that were being followed were obsolete with the new covenant in Christ. The institution of these rules and laws rejected Jesus, forcing him outside of the camp. And so I believe that being too comfortable in life causes complacency in life. Being in the camp for too long causes complacency. Being too comfortable in our churches can cause complacency, where there's little growth or none in regards to our lives with Christ and our relationships with Christ. But outside of the camp, living causes a person to be uncomfortable, to suffer, and thus be in need, and to rely on Christ and his sacrifice. And with this life, growth occurs, and we see praise and love coming out of it, just like the verses say. And so these verses have rocked my core, like really just worked. I mean, this week as I've been preparing and studying, it's been something they've just been tearing through my heart, like honestly. And they've helped me to think about times in the past and the present where I've lived inside the camp, where I've been comfortable and where I've just been status quo, stagnant, complacent. You know, times in the church where I've allowed myself to be so comfortable, where the words coming out of my mouth are not ones of love and praise, but ones of like putting down the pastor, or how can they make those decisions, or why is the leadership doing this, or did pastor even prepare this Sunday? Or times where I've thought so highly of myself that I'm so comfortable in the environment of the church where it's like, I'm the best volunteer and why am I not getting this respect? Or I think about things that I've seen within the church, like the story that I introduced with. You know, where people get upset because they think they deserve more as volunteers. And so what happens when something doesn't go their way? They quit and leave. Or people that are so complacent and so comfortable within the church community that it's easy, just like me, for them to do the same and to talk behind people's back and talk behind the leadership's back and to create an atmosphere and environment that is filled with hate and anger and not one of love. Or people that walk in and see somebody sitting in their pew that they've sat in for 20 years and how dare they sit there, and now I'm angry for the rest of the service. Or they walk in and they see a new usher or a greeter and they make a snide remark because they're used to seeing the other person and they like that person better. I've had that happen to me as a greeter, and I had to go preach right afterwards. And it's like, what's going on in my head? I'm like, have to go up to the pulpit and give a sermon, and all that's on my mind is that somebody wasn't happy because I was greeting, living inside the camp. Or we've seen this too, people being overly critical, possessive about positions or assignments. It's all outside the camp, inside the camp living. That's all inside the camp living. And so we've seen these things, and I believe it is caused by, just like I said, inside the camp living. And I believe the story that I told at the introduction, the people in my story were not trying to necessarily be mean or malicious, but because they were so comfortable living inside the camp. They valued the rules and the laws more than the person. And it's a fool's errand. And if there's ever a time where we as a church need to be striving to live outside the camp, it's now. I mean, what is going on in the world? There's a pandemic and hundreds of thousands of people are dying, and there are protests, and people are fighting for change in this country and in this world. And for a lot of people, it's scary, and you know, it's something that people may be coming into the church for the first time. You know, maybe they have a little seedling of faith that's growing, and they want to come in these doors of the church and they want to check it out. And I tell you what, they know when the congregation is living inside the camp, and they know when it's living outside the camp. It's very apparent. And they know when anger and hatred fills the halls and not love and praise. And it's not where we are called to live. But let's take this idea and apply it to our personal lives. Let's bring this closer to home. And evaluate the areas in our lives where we may be living inside the camp. How is your marriage and your relationships? How are you as a father and a mother and an aunt and uncle and grandparents? How are you as a co-worker? What do your relationships look like? Are they ones that are growing out of living inside the camp, or are they ones that grow out of living outside of the camp? I tell you what, when I think about this, I think about my life and my comfort. And in living inside the camp for so long, especially in my marriage, I mean, the reality is this: I've allowed myself to be so comfortable in my marriage that I have no longer controlled the words that come out of my mouth when I communicate with my wife. And sometimes, they're mean, it's mean, and it tears her apart because she doesn't communicate the way I do. She's very quiet and takes everything in, and it eats her up. I've allowed myself to live inside the camp for so long and be so comfortable with my life and my marriage that I'm destroying it by my actions. And so lately, my prayer, especially through working through these verses for the last few weeks, my prayer has been to meet Jesus outside of the camp, to walk that lone road with him, to be uncomfortable, to be in need, and to rely on him for growth to occur in my life, for praise to come out of my mouth instead of evil and hateful words, and for goodness to flow out of my heart for my fellow neighbor, and for love to reign. And so as we close, I want you to imagine a church that is committed to living outside of the camp. A church where we strive to not talk behind the pastor or leadership's back. A church where we strive to not get possessive over things or positions. A church where the pettiness is weeded out of the halls and they are filled with love and not anger or hate. Where a vision is cast on following Christ and living not for this world or for this moment, but what is to come. And I want you to imagine what your life will look like if you live outside of the camp with your relationships and your marriages, and how better they can be. Friends, as Christ followers, we are called to live outside of the camp with Jesus. It may be uncomfortable and we will need the intervention of Jesus in our lives, but we will be living for what is not of this world and what cannot bring salvation. The beautiful thing is what comes out of this life is not one of comfort that is fueled by earthly wants, anger, and hate, but one where we praise God with our lips and love everyone with our hearts. Let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, I just pray that these words, that your words, that these verses can just work in the hearts of all Christ followers. That they can work in the hearts of our Christ followers and their involvement in church and their attitude in church, and that their attitude in life. And that we can be a group of people and a group of Christ followers that live radically outside of the camp. Where it may be uncomfortable, but we will be in need. And we have to reach out to our Father for help. And we have no choice. And that what comes out of that life is not one of hate and anger, but one of love. Amen.
Sometimes on this journey, I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is the canvas for your strength. My story isn't over, my story's just begun. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. 'Cause failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Lay your burdens down. You're in the Father's house. Check the shade at the door, and it ain't well become anymore. You're in the Father's house, yeah. the journey's where you are. You never want it perfect, you just want it by heart. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. Failures never final when the Father's in the room. Well, failures never final when the Father's in the room. Lay your burdens down. You're in the Father's house. You shake at the door, and He didn't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house. Yeah. Whoa. Prodigals come home. Prodigals come home. The helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors fling wide. The dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's on the move. Here we go. Miracles take place. The cynical find faith. Love is breaking through.